everybody, to the Autism Now What podcast. Today, I'll be speaking to Sarah from London, and she is the clinical director and founder of SL Therapy London, established in 2017. With a career spanning over a decade, she has dedicated her expertise to helping families, schools, and nurseries enhance children's communication skills. She's my most favorite speech therapist. She holds a BA Honours in English, Language and Literature from the University of Leeds and a BSc Honours in Speech and Language Therapy from Birmingham City University. What a treat to be speaking to her. Her extensive pediatric therapeutic background includes working in mainstream and special schools, early years, and clinic settings. If you're a speech therapist, you've got to be listening to our podcast today. As the former head of therapies at an independent school for students with complex communication needs, autism, and challenging behaviors, she led a multidisciplinary team of speech therapists, occupational therapists, and music therapists. I love the word multidisciplinary there. She played a key role in developing service delivery, shaping policies, and driving strategic planning for the school's therapy services while also managing a specialist caseload. Sarah has advanced training in the ADOS-2 testing for autism. She has undertaken extensive postgraduate training in therapeutic approaches, including selective mutism. We'd love to also hear more about that. Pathological demand avoidance, a lot of kids being diagnosed with that, and Gestalt language processing. I actually want to also ask you about Gestalt later, Sarah. She is highly regarded as an expert witness with extensive experience in providing assessment and expert advice for tribunals. Sarah, this just goes on and on and on. Your accolades, this is amazing. Communication is Sarah's passion, and she has been privileged to have worked at a senior level with professional bodies such as the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists to champion best practice in the field. Sarah's thought leadership in the field is widely recognized. Say her name and they know about her in London and internationally. She has delivered keynote speeches, served as a guest speaker at conferences, and contributed to professional publications, including the Journal of Health, Visiting and Child Language Teaching and Therapy. Very, very interesting. She worked in collaboration with the Abu Dhabi Department of Education and Knowledge to establish a multidisciplinary therapy department in the first ever school for children with ASD in the UAE. Her dedication to supporting children and young people with communication needs has earned her a reputation as a leading specialist in the field, both in the UK and internationally. Sarah, welcome. It is absolutely a privilege for our parents and our South African speech therapists to hear more about your work and to have you answer some questions today. So just to dive straight into my questions, let's start at the beginning. What prompted you to study speech therapy all those years ago?
Well, I think, as you're very aware, that anybody who works with children with special needs will have a connection or in some way. And mine is my brother. So my brother has Down syndrome. And I grew up with him. I saw him having therapy sessions with a speech therapist every week, and I was quite jealous and intrigued by all these games this therapist was playing with my brother. And it just prompted an interest in working more with children with communication challenges and supporting them. So I decided to pursue a career in speech therapy, and the joyfulness of the work is that you really can have a portfolio CV, as you've just described, hearing everything in one paragraph read out together means that you there are so many areas to explore, as we know, with communication. And I now am passionate about working at the expert witness level. So in the UK, that means advocating for the children's rights to have the speech and language provision that they deserve on their educational health and care plans, which leads me to presenting my evidence at court hearings.
Giving children a voice is very powerful. I have three boys. My middle son, Ellie, is now in third year medical school, and growing up with a profoundly autistic brother, he saw him struggling to communicate all the years, and he decided to study medicine because he wants to help other children and individuals with autism feel better and lead a good quality life. And so I think as a sibling, when you see your brother or your sister going through hardship, that definitely prompts you to choose a certain career. And that was definitely the case in your circumstances. Now, what is the most important piece of advice you can give any speech therapist starting out their practice?
The most important piece of advice, and I do give this to the young, I say young therapists I work with, like young in terms of career, and students that we support on placements, is don't panic. Don't panic. It's always very helpful to write out your session plan. I always did in even the first couple of years of delivering therapy. And one important piece of advice that was given to me by my clinical supervisor when I first started out, which I now pass on, is always include a step up and a step down with every activity that you're doing, because you can plan a wonderful speech therapy session and then the child immediately completes all the targets within the first 5 minutes. So always have a step up so you know what you can build the activity onto, and have it written out so you've got a plan next to you just to keep you on track. Because after a couple of years, you won't need to write it out. It will just be ingrained in your brain, in your memory. But while everything is still quite new and you're holding all these bits of information together, or your learnings from university or your experiences from placement and trying to apply them now into your therapy session, it's just handy to have those kind of written notes in a structure for you.
That's really good advice. And time flies. When you look back, it's been 5 years and 10 years. And I think the more patients you see, the more your experience grows, the more you settle into the job. As you know, I'm the director of an ABA company, and I always say to the new instructors, the first 6 months, you're definitely still learning, but we've definitely identified the criteria in you that we're looking for. And if you're a speech therapist who's passed university, you definitely have been identified as an individual who has the criteria to be successful. So have the confidence, don't panic, as you said. I love that. Don't panic, and be organized. I think that's very, very important, is be organized. You've worked at a senior level with professional bodies such as the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists to champion best practice in this field. How would you describe best practice?
I would describe it as staying true to your professional judgment. And your professional judgment as a speech and language therapist is built out of your clinical experience and also with the clinical evidence that we have in our field. And I think it's very important for speech therapists to remember that. And I always championed that with the therapists that I worked with, that you must always stay true to what the dosage and the intervention recommendations are, led by the clinical evidence.
A very powerful answer. Now, one of your specialities is treating children with autism. Tell us more about how you got involved in supporting children with autism to improve their communication.
So when I started really in my first job, working in the NHS in the UK, and there were young children, so it was under 5, we called them early years, age group, with autism, and as we call it, as it's a spectrum, there were a spectrum of communication challenges. There were some very verbal young autistic children, who required different intervention and programs, to a child that I was working with who was nonverbal, who required more of a communication aid. So I think over my 15 years now of clinical working as a speech therapist, I've worked across the whole spectrum of autism and also of ages, from 2, 3 year olds all the way up to adulthood as well. And as a speech and language therapist, we have such a key fundamental role at each part of the child's development as their communication challenges change, develop, progress, and support their functional communication.
And each child is so different on the autism spectrum. So they each really require their individualized program. Now, what advice can you offer speech therapists who are working with nursery school children and suspect a diagnosis of autism? In South Africa, the occupational therapist and the speech therapist will often tell us that they're nervous to tell the parents that they suspect an autism diagnosis. What advice do you have for these therapists?
That it is your professional and clinical duty to make parents and educators aware if you have identified a possible communication challenge. That is our job, speech and language therapists. I think sometimes our title is misleading. I know it's a protected title, but so many families and educators I work with misunderstand that, especially when working with children with autism, because they sometimes think, well, it's not speech articulation. So I always say if we were called communication specialists, it would really open up the understanding to what we work on and what we cover. And I do think the role has changed over the years since it became a protected title way back when, decades ago. Don't quote me on a specific date. But it is our professional duty to make parents and educators aware. Obviously, you wouldn't ever use the clinical medical definition of autism, but there are ways of describing what you are seeing as indicators. So a key phrase would be, I've noted that this child is presenting with significant social communication challenges, which include, and list them, reduced eye contact, difficulty interacting with peers, very dysregulated during group carpet time activities. There is a purpose to describe what you are seeing and present that information. So I don't think a professional should ever be nervous because that is part of our role.
I love your answer. And I love the confidence that you're giving other speech therapists listening, because with the incidence of the diagnosis now, we absolutely need the speech therapist to be making the parents aware of those red flags and not shying away from letting the parents know, what they suspect. So I think your answer was really brilliant. And I think it's going to be so encouraging for other therapists listening today to hear that and to give them the encouragement and the motivation to make that diagnosis, because after all, early intervention is key. Now, many parents and professionals listening today have heard about applied behavior analysis, ABA. What are your thoughts around this methodology as an intervention for autism?
I'm very pro ABA, which is the professional way to say it. I was actually speaking to an ABA consultant this morning, and I always find I have to start any conversation I have with a new ABA professional I'm working with I love ABA. And we'll come on to a minute with the disconnects between the professions regarding this. And she said, "Oh, it's really good to hear you're pro ABA." So that is the more professional way to describe it. I'm pro ABA, but yes, I love it. I think it absolutely has a place and a necessity as part of the intervention package of working with the child with autism.
I'm so happy to hear that you're pro ABA. It's really refreshing speaking to you. I think speech therapists in South Africa tend to advise parents against ABA. Unfortunately, they feel that it is torture treatment. I've heard those words before. ABA is bad, ABA is robotic. There's a long list of myths around applied behavior analysis. I've had parents tell me that their speech therapist and occupational therapist have said that if they actually sign up for applied behavior analysis, they will resign as their speech therapist and occupational therapist. I've heard this numerous times now, and it happens at least once a week in South Africa, where I'll hear the parents say, the speech therapist advised we shouldn't enroll our son in ABA, but we were curious and we wanted to know more about it. So we booked a consultation with you. How do you think we can educate other therapists in applied behavior analysis? What do we need to do to collaborate and to work together? And tell us more about how ABA and speech therapy can actually complement each other, because it's not a choice necessarily of one or the other.
Yes, I'm just formulating my thoughts because I have so much to talk on this topic. And it's something that I come across a lot in the UK as well. There's a lot of families that I work with, and are very hesitant to tell me that they are also working with an ABA tutor. And again, I start the preamble by saying, I love ABA, and you immediately see them relax. This has been a feature of my profession since I've started as a speech therapist. And I used to not like ABA, and I would say categorically, oh no, I don't agree with ABA. But I wouldn't be able to tell you why. It was, and this might be my own personal experience in the organizations that I was working with, but it was a kind of ingrained response. Oh no, 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 speech therapists don't agree with ABA. But I didn't understand why until I went to a school in London called Snowflake School, which is an ABA school. It has integrated therapies in the school. And I went for a visit to the school, and I was very honest with the senior member staff I met and said, look, I'm a speech therapist and don't like any, but I don't know why. He said, right, give me an hour and I'm going to explain it to you and show you and see what you think. And after that hour, I completely changed my mindset. I wouldn't say change my mindset, because I don't think it was ever my mindset to begin with. Like I said, it was this ingrained kind of ideology that you would have to say as a speaker that I don't agree with ABA. So that school very much, and seeing how they worked, and there were speech therapists there. I spoke to them, as you probably can tell from my personality, I'm quite direct and quite open. So I would say, look, what do you do as a speech therapist? How did it work with ABA? And I got to observe a session and observe it. So that visit to that school really changed my thinking and secured my understanding into believing and knowing that ABA is can be an appropriate intervention for children with autism. So in my team, SL Therapy, I encourage all of my therapists, and they do, we're all very pro ABA here, to find their understanding with it. Yeah, because it's still quite ingrained. Oh no, we don't agree with ABA. And I always say to a therapist when I meet them and they tell me I don't agree with it, I ask them why. Why don't you? And I haven't yet found a response that has given me confidence to argue against it. So I throw that open to the listeners if they wish to comment and give me their why. Because I think that's really important as well for the understanding and moving on to how we can collaborate together. ABA and speech therapy work really well together because I've seen it work well together, and I live it with the families that we support. My company has partnered with Brainbox in Kuwait. We have a clinic in Kuwait. Brainbox is ABA, as you guys are in South Africa, and SL Therapy provides a speech therapy. And our ABA practitioners and our speech therapists work together collaboratively to deliver a child's communication program, because we're working on the same targets. To break it down very simply to anybody listening, if you look at what an ABA approaches and a speech therapy approaches, it is very different to what it was historically, where it was seen as kind of Pavlov's dog theory. We teach the child this, they get a reward. It is not like that anymore. It is child led. And what is speech therapy? Child led. What targets are we working on? Functional communication, social and play, life skills, learning. To any speech therapist listening to that should, I hope, very much resonate. But the ABA is looking at the behaviours, and we're looking at the communication with those behaviours. All behaviour is communications, we know, and behaviour is a critical result of the environment. And what we do together is we work with the child who has autism to develop functional communication skills and behaviours to be able to access environments that they may be scared or unaware of, such as getting ready for the classroom, being able to go to the supermarket, going to a dentist appointment, being able to travel on an airplane. So together we kind of utilize the strategies so that they can engage in behaviors that will help them access their environment.
As you know, I have three boys. My oldest is profoundly autistic. He's 22, and my youngest, he's turning 13. He made a 360 turnaround. My youngest, Aaron, had a severe apraxia to start. He honestly is a miracle, and it's very, very fortunate that we were able to rehabilitate his speech motor planning. Um, I really enjoyed hearing you explain how speech therapy and ABA can work together. And I think it's very, very important for parents and professionals to hear today why you pro ABA and why you think that the two different disciplines can actually work together to achieve best results for the kids. Now, actually, with my younger son, I had an SLP from New York who was very, very well trained in speech motor planning, visiting South Africa regularly, helping us on the speech motor planning part and the language part, and if my child was in ABA, or if I had a child who was recently diagnosed with autism, I couldn't think of a better program than combining ABA with a speech therapist like you. You've spent years, speech therapists have spent years at university studying language and communication. They have so much to offer a child on the spectrum, as do the ABA technicians. I mean, we talk about the science of applied behavior analysis. ABA also achieve results because of the number of opportunities during the week that the ABA team give the child to practice those developmental skills that they're missing. And then the SLP comes in and enhances the program, and together it's a collaboration. Sarah, what do you think I can do to open the minds of speech therapists in South Africa for a future collaboration? You have told us about the why, and I think you've summarized that beautifully. I mean, that really resonates with me. You're against ABA, you have to ask the why question, but what can I do to ensure a collaboration between speech therapists and ABA therapists, because it is so, so important for the children. And right now, there are no ABA therapists and speech therapists really that I know of in South Africa that work together, because the speech therapists will not hear of ABA. They will not hear of it.
Well, I think it comes down to the educating and bringing awareness of how speech therapy and ABA can positively impact and work together. So I would advise, at the risk of giving out my contact details, having a chat with me and I can explain it. Also looking on Brainbox and SL Therapy Kuwait Instagram, we do regular videos of our practitioners working together with children. Seeing it in evidence, if that makes sense, I think would very much help. Offering trainings led by a pro ABA speech therapist. I think maybe with the greatest respect, coming from an ABA field to a speech therapy audience may have some disconnect or prevent. I hate to use the word prevent, but yeah, be a barrier because of coming from an ABA world. But if you had a speech therapist and occupational therapist who were pro MDT working and explaining how it worked together, I hope that would make an impact. If previous attempts haven't worked, as it were, and the awareness isn't out there in South Africa at the minute, just to hear from a pro ABA speech therapist and explaining the why and giving clear examples. I've touched on the areas we work on today, but in a different podcast or presentation, I would provide treatment plans, programs, show them this is the same that we're working on. When I've done presentations before in the UK, speech therapists have nodded along, go, oh, yes, that's what we work on too. Oh, you're sharing, turn taking, oh, that's what we work on too. And just aligning it and speaking to them in their language. Because the ABA tutors that I work with, we always laugh. We always say, look, we're working on the same things. We just use different terminology, manding, VP mapping, but we are so aligned in what we do. So I think just keep banging at that door.
You're giving me
If I
hope.
can give that it's a good imagery, but just keep banging at the door because there are speech therapists out there, and I'm sure, again, feel free to comment. I'm not the only one in the country, and I'm certainly not in the Middle East, because we are living proof of it. We are doing daily ABA speech therapy, functional communication sessions, and they're making such a difference. The feedback we've had from families that we work with has just been incredible, and that's the goal. And I think for any professional, regardless of what your views are, about an intervention a parent is choosing to use or not use, your professional integrity is key. And if the child is making progress and it is benefiting that child and the family unit, and there's been made progress and they are getting ready for school and they're now able to access a classroom, then that has got to be accepted.
I love your answer. That was brilliant. I love your advice. And with your permission, I'd be very happy to share your contact details. With ABA, the children are in a program every single day where we're working
Mhm.
towards their developmental skills that are deficit, that are also driving the behaviors. And then along comes the SLP to enhance all the language and the communication, and a collaboration between these two disciplines going forward would really certainly be in the best interests of the children. As you mentioned, whenever there's a diagnosis, it doesn't just affect the child, it affects the family. And having a child who can't speak, can't vocalize, or has no appropriate means to communicate can be such a debilitating condition. Um, I've been thinking about what you've been saying as well, and I'm thinking to myself, if you're a speech therapist listening and you have been anti-ABA, not pro-ABA, you're very welcome to contact me and come and watch our sessions at the Star Academy, and observe the sessions, and then pass comment on whether ABA is good or bad. There are many myths around ABA. But then we do talk about the science of behavior analysis. It's data driven. It's been time tested and proven to be successful in children across the spectrum over the last 30 years. So I'd really like to invite those speech therapists listening today to attend at our ABA Academy, or to come and sit in and observe us, our ABA technicians, working with the kids, and then form an opinion. Sarah, I often find that people adopt the opinion of others. They don't actually take the time to actually research and investigate. Somebody else said ABA was bad, or maybe somebody had a bad experience with an ABA program that wasn't a good quality ABA program. If you are wanting to achieve results with your children on the spectrum, and especially those kids who've got that apraxia, they really, really would benefit so much from an ABA program where we're following through on your SLP targets on a daily basis. So I hope you've given me hope. You've given me hope, Sarah. And I hope that the speech therapist listening today will take me up on the invitation to come and take a look at what we're doing. They can certainly fly to Kuwait and have a look at your ABA programs there. But it's very, very refreshing to hear your account of ABA and speech therapy achieving good results with children, and just to hear you say that you're pro ABA. So that's really, really amazing. Now, can you share 3 key criteria for success when working with children with autism?
Just 3? Okay, 3. Number 1, be prepared to go into the child's world, to be child-led. So you may want to be working on an activity, developing language using flashcards on a table, but the child wants to jump on the trampoline. What do? You bring your target into what the child is doing. And I'd say that's for every child and every young person, but I think that's very important to kind of have that in your mind. Second thing is to always make sure that you are collaborating and connecting with the whole team around the child. So, of course, starting off with the parent and then the educational setting and any other therapists and practitioners that the child is working with. It's only through that joint working, collaborative working together that the child is going to have the best possible chance for communication success. And thirdly, I'm a speech therapist. And I always say, never trust a speech therapist who doesn't have bubbles or a sensory toy on them. So I would always say have bubbles, or I have a squeezy toy, the mesh balls. I don't know what you call that. Everybody calls them something different.
Yes, the
I
best.
find them too sensory for me. Yeah, it's like eyes popping out. So I always have a mesh ball and bubbles, and there is so much that you can do, and so much you can engage a child with having understanding the sensory alongside the communication, which again is why occupational therapists are so important as well. So coming back to the second point, it's having that whole team working in collaboration, making sure that all the strategies used are consistent, and are all there to develop the child's communication.
I will tell you that we do have parents who have an occupational therapist, and if they come up with a sensory box or a list of activities that they think is important for the parents to ensure that the child is engaging in during the week, during their sessions, then the ABA team have that list, and we follow through on that list during our ABA sessions. So, for example, if it's brushing, or if it's, crawling through a tunnel, or if it's just jumping on the trampoline or giving them deep pressure. During the week, when they're waiting for their next occupational therapy session, the ABA team are going to firstly actually teach that child to identify when they require sensory input. So to ask for a break or to ask for the tunnel. So we're working on that communication so they can ask for their sensory needs. And then we're going to follow through, which also takes the burden off the parents. So for the occupational therapist listening, we really, really enjoy collaborating with you because the sensory piece is so important for the child's overall learning and for them to, in the end, develop their speech, language, and communication. Now, I wanted to know more about Gestalt language processing. This is a word I've heard a lot, Gestalt. Can you tell us more about that for the parents listening? What does it mean to have a child who's got Gestalt language processing?
So this means that instead of how, I hate to use the word typical, but with kind of typical analytical language development, you learn the sentence structure with the nouns and then the verbs, and then you add them together, and then you have subject, verb, object sentence like boy brushing hair, girl eating apple, and you build up your sentence and grammatical structure from there. With Gestalt language processing, this applies to children that are learning language through Gestalt. So they are chunks of language. So it could be echolalia, it could be scripting, so scripts from their favorite TV shows that they are then applying in communicating. But what we say when we work with children with Gestalt language processing, you've very much got to be a detective. You've got to work very closely with the parents as well, who know the child, are an expert on their child, and are able to help you identify where the script is coming from. So, for example, I was working with a child the other day, and they were talking about we had Peppa Pig, and the Peppa Pig was going on the plane. And then all of a sudden, the child said, and to Africa, and put the plane up to fly. And I was looking confused. Mum was looking confused, and then we unpicked it, and it turned out that this had been on one of the child's favourite TV shows, and it had been a show that she'd watched, episode she'd watched quite regularly. So she'd picked that from there and was applying it to the play scenario. It may be as well where they're using a phrase from a TV show when they're upset, for example. So instead of being able to spontaneously say I'm sad or I'm in pain, they may use a script from a TV show, and it's being a detective to understand, well, where's that from. So when I start working with a family, everyone gets homework from me and they have to complete 50 utterances. So over the course of maybe a week, they would fill out the form, and it would be what the child said. And then all the most important column for me is where, what was happening, what was going on, what was the child watching. So you unpick from there what the scripts are actually representing. Yeah. So for example, if a child, she really likes ice cream, but we'll always use this script from Bluey, for example, when she wants an ice cream. So we now know when she says this chunk of language, we know she means that. So there are several stages to start language processing. I won't go into them now because that's a whole other training in itself. I would highly recommend that any speech therapist or professional keen to learn more about it do look at the meaningfulspeech.com website, and the speech den, with fantastic therapists and professionals there, who explain it very well. And as I come back to what I talked about at the beginning, have the clinical evidence, and the case studies, to really support this, which some in the speech therapy world, again, comment below if this isn't the case, but it seems to not be a new thing, but has come more to the forefront of therapists understanding about how a child processes language, especially children on the autism spectrum, to how we may have theraped them, if I can turn it into a verb, years ago. Yeah, so years ago, we would have done subject verb objects and taught the analytical way and got colourful semantics out, which we all know, which is learning through colour and subject verb object sentence. Actually, now we are discarding that and looking towards learning the child's gestalts and then working with them to use declarative language to support them to develop their spontaneous functional communication in a way that they understand, and we go into their world. As I come back to, it's very important to be very child-led. So there's lots of information out there, but for absolutely honing in on it, I would go to meaningfulspeech.com. They offer specific trainings on that as well. But it is something that speech therapists as well, are being aware of more now, especially in the UK. And it's an important way to understand how a child on the autism spectrum is developing and understanding and using language. And I think for a long time there was a view that echolalia was meaningless, or we need to move the child away from echolalia. But actually, it really has a place, and it shouldn't be ignored. It should be noted down and and studied to understand, well, what is the child trying to communicate through using these scripts and echolalia.
Thank you for sharing that knowledge and expertise. I think everyone's going to be very appreciative of that website that you recommended as well. Just to talk a little bit on the echolalia, I agree with you because there are children who can't even do echolalia. When I speak to parents and they'll say, well, my child repeats everything that I say, I will say to them, well, you've got 50% of the battle won, because imagine if the child couldn't copy anything at all. At least they're copying, they echoing what you're saying. Now you have something to work from. You can go there and turn that into spontaneous functional communication. But when they're not echoing altogether, and they're not imitating, that's very, very, very challenging. And my older son, David, who's now profoundly autistic, at 23, we're talking about 20 years of me turning the world upside down to help him with different treatments. And we never, ever gave up on his vocal language. What mother doesn't want to hear their child talking and telling them what they want? Even David today, the words that he can say, we worked really, really hard. He worked really, really hard over and over again, practicing the speech motor planning patterns. And every single word is so important to us. It's so empowering to him. His imitation actually was non-existent. David never had echolalia. I would actually envy the parents whose children did have echolalia, because I'd be like, okay, at least they can imitate and say the words. I know we have to then move that echolalia into functional communication, but my son David, my oldest, couldn't even imitate the consonants, vowels, and blends to make the word, which can be very, very challenging. I mean, he was 5 years old, Sarah, and he still could not say a single sound.
Mm.
It's a scary place to be as a parent. You know, the silence is deafening. I'm sure you have many parents or children with autism crying on your shoulder.
Absolutely, and that's why I'm so privileged to do the work that I do, and support these families, and especially with the expert witness work that I am very passionate about is making sure that there's a lot of families in the UK that self-fund therapy provision at this time, and they, in the short answer, they shouldn't be. And they shouldn't be. They, as I know as well, my personal experience, and as you do, there is so much going on within family life. Parents, as one mother said to me the other day, I'm a parent. I'm not a professional, and I'm expected to be an educational psychologist. I'm expected to be an occupational therapist, a speech and language therapist, a parent, and at the end of the day, be me at some point. And that's not right. And that's why we exist, and that's why we do what we do. So I very much, that's why I say I champion that speech therapists stay to their professional integrity. We have studied at university, we have graduate degrees to work as speech and language therapists. We have very much have a role in supporting the child and the family. To make sure that the child has as many communication opportunities as possible, and that does involve ABA as well, with intervention programs looking at functional communication skills, as we both said, all behaviours communication, and we both have a role in our different disciplines to work together to support that.
Just for everybody listening, I was introduced to you through a parent in the UK whose child is on the spectrum, and she was receiving speech therapy from you and also applied behavior analysis in the UK. And she introduced me to you in 2024. And I then decided to host a presentation on autism in London. And this parent said to me, you must get hold of Sarah, invite her to present at your conference. I remember sending you the invite. And if you could have only seen how excited I was when you accepted my invitation, I was literally popping the champagne. It was wonderful that a speech therapist in London agreed to also present at the presentation. And it was really very, very well received. I mean, we had over 250 attendees, and that's just where we met for the first time. So it's so lovely to be picking up the conversation again, and I really hope to get you to South Africa also. Now, I have another question for you. A lot of parents are facing a child diagnosed with pathological demand avoidance. What is your advice to these parents? A teenager can be defiant, but with pathological demand avoidance, it's just on another level. In our ABA programs, we do also treat children with pathological demand avoidance. We do have those kids. What is your advice to the parents, and how do you approach working with these children when you deliver your language and communication programs?
So I think the first thing to say is it's still, I wouldn't say unknown, but not as prevalent for awareness for parents and professionals. So there's in the UK, it's called the PDA Society, that I do recommend that parents and professionals access, because there's so much really good advice on there. And I actually was trained by them a couple of years ago now, because it was something as speech therapists that we weren't automatically had knowledge and training of at university. So there is always postgraduate training that does and should take place as speech and language therapists. I think it's very much about being very aware of framing your words. Yeah, framing instructions, making sure that nothing is seen as a direct request, more as a collaboration. Shall we play this game? Giving rather than saying, we're going to play this game now, or let's play this game, shall we? What do you think? What do you think would be best? And especially when I do sessions, I will always put out an array of activities. So it's very much led by the child and the young person. This is their choice. They get to choose which one we do first, what we're doing next. I'm very much aware that we are going to complete everything on the table, but they can choose the order, and work with them that way. Negotiation strategies as well. I want to finish now. Or well, should we try one more? What do you think? You're doing really well. Positive praise, reinforcement, reassurance as well. Really underpins this a lot. So a lot of the work I then do with parents is about the framing of the words. It's so quick and easy. Say, let's get your shoes on. It's time to go out the door. Game over.
Yeah.
Okay, let's break down that situation. How are we going to frame the words? And one parent has, I've got Sarah's phrases on a um the fridge door for the morning, because morning routines, family life moves so quickly, doesn't it? So just to have those phrases like, oh right, now say it this way, makes such a difference. That it's, I always say, it's those little tweaks, little nuances of language that really support. But every child, as we know, is unique, and every situation is unique for every family and every kind of educational setting. So I would say it's very much working with the family and the school or the educational setting, but very much any professional should access the PDA Society website for the most comprehensive, robust information and evidence, and then build their work out of that.
Good advice, Sarah. Thank you. I want to just comment that I am aware, and I've spoken to many UK parents, and they have told me that the NHS seem to fall short in addressing their needs. And as you were saying earlier, a lot of the UK parents are having to pay out of pocket for speech and language and ABA. And so I was very surprised hearing this, because we live in South Africa. It's a third world country, but we think, okay, this is London, okay? And they're just going to have the services. But hopefully there'll be a reform in the future, and more access to speech and language therapy and to ABA therapy in London, because the pressure on the parents and the panic really does set in. And when the children are young, early intervention is key. So I am aware of the struggles that parents encounter in the UK with NHS to really actually access the treatments that they need if their child is diagnosed with autism. Similar in South Africa, we really... First of all, to get a diagnosis, sometimes you have to wait 6 months, 9 months for a neurologist, and then you losing precious time. That's why it's so important for the speech therapist who's suspecting a diagnosis to share that with the family, as you mentioned earlier. Another just observation, in South Africa, the education system is very different to the UK. In the UK, it seems that you have inclusive education. In South Africa, as much as we have legislation that recommends inclusive education, we don't really have legislation that enforces inclusive education. So schools tend not to include children on the spectrum, or children with a language delay, or with some kind of diagnosis, Down syndrome, CP. In South Africa, we have mainstream school box, then you have remedial school box, and then special needs that all get lumped together. The children don't really have opportunity for inclusive education, and if they do, that's because the parents paid privately for private schools and really had to fight the school system to secure inclusive education. That's where the ABA team will come in from Star Academy, where we will, facilitate the children and provide the infrastructure to make inclusive education possible. Tell us more about your thoughts around inclusive education, how it works in the UK, why it's important for children with a learning difference to be included in the education system.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So in the UK, obviously, we have mainstream schools, and then specialist provision in schools. And in the UK, that they can be further specialised into SEMH, so social, emotional, mental health needs. It can be autism, it could be severe learning needs, differentiated within special school system, as it were, as opposed to what you described as just lumped in together. Direct quote. And also, what we have in the UK are units or language resource bases or language resource provisions. And this is where within a mainstream school, there will be a provision where children that do require therapeutic input, support for their learning and their language and their sensory needs can access throughout the school day and week. But they still have that interaction and that opportunity to be part of the mainstream school community, which works very well ever since I was started 15 years ago. My first ever role was in a language unit in a school, and it's very effective. It can work very well. So there are. It sounds like that there's obviously mainstream and special school, but I think within the UK there is further specialisms within the systems.
It's lovely to hear your opinion on that, and we try to encourage inclusive education in South Africa because we do want the children to model from peers that do have language. If they can be, for example, included just during break time, where they can then hear the peers speaking typical language that helps, when the child on the spectrum has somebody they can learn from and model from. In South Africa, they tend to just lump all the kids together with behavior in a classroom. One of the kids may have a few words, another child may not talk at all, another child may have, more language, where I would think that child should actually be included in a mainstream school. We obviously don't advocate for inclusive education for every single child because they do need prerequisite skills for school. Or actually, I don't know how it works in the UK because I have heard of cases where the child can be completely nonverbal and they do get included in the mainstream. But we've got a long way to go in South Africa. And just for the teachers listening and the speech therapists listening, that being able to be included in the mainstream can be very, very beneficial, both for the child who needs the treatment, but then also for the other children, the typically developing children, to learn that there are children with a difference. Right, Sarah? What are the benefits to the typically developing children to have exposure to children with a difference?
Well, I'll give you a case study. And this is for all the speechies out there, as I like to call speech and language therapists. So I am working with a young child who has autism, who is in a mainstream class. So not provision in the mainstream class, but his one-to-one support is not just a teaching assistant, so kind of a general teaching assistant, is his ABA tutor. So I work with her regularly, supporting her with the targets. But because she is ABA background, which means she has, significant secure qualifications to support his communication, I've seen this in practice work so well with two of his peers in the classroom during a turn-taking activity. So I have been working with him in speech therapy, working on turn-taking in a more structured environment. And then what she's been able to do is take all that learning from my session, plus all her ABA training about behavioural teachings of turn taking skills. And I observed the functional communication opportunity between the child and two peers during a turn taking game in the classroom. And she was there to support. And just at that point, all that was needed was verbal prompts, and then stepped back and they continued the interaction together, which shows the importance of having that input of specialist support in the mainstream environment over a period of time. Sustained support on a daily basis can then be withdrawn, not completely, but, from the system, but I'm saying momentarily in that moment for spontaneous communication. And it was so effective. It was a wonderful, I really wish it was one of those examples that, I know there's confidentiality and I definitely wanted it, but just to kind of film it will take a moment, as evidence, everything that you're saying today about the way that ABA is perceived and misunderstood, as I would say it, was so beautifully encapsulated in this moment that I saw in this session. So I'm not sure if that does answer your question or not, but it came to my mind and I thought I have to share this example because it's a truthful one. It did happen, and it does happen regularly with the children that I work with when they have that kind of specialized one-to-one support, but in the mainstream environment.
I'm so glad you shared that story. That's spot on. I have two more questions. When would you give a child an AAC device? When are they ready for that alternative augmentative communication piece? We're not going to give up on their vocal speech. We're always going to try. We're going to keep practicing the speech motor. But when do you recommend an AAC device? What are the considerations?
I think the first consideration is the child at picture level, in terms of their understanding. So obviously we start at object level. Can the child understand that differentiate, make a choice between two objects? And then the next stage is, can they make a choice between two pictures or two symbols that represent those objects? So that's first on the list. At the risk of going into occupational therapy territory, the next thing that prerequisite I always look at is their ability to point, to tap. Have they got that motor function? Because that is what I've gone straight to high tech. I always do in my head. So I'll come back to low tech in a minute if we're looking at our next boards. But in terms of using like Prolo Quota Go, Grid 3, are they able to tap? Have they got that function to tap in order to make that request? What how's their intention? Are they aware of their surroundings? Are they I'm working with a little child. I'm just so mindful of confidentiality and not giving away anything. I'm working with a little person at the moment who's so inquisitive of their surroundings and so aware of their surroundings, and that to me as well is a very key foundational tool for looking at the AAC. But there are obviously low tech versions as well versus high tech. A lot of the kind of legal cases that I'm involved in the minute within the expert witness tribunal world is around the AAC devices. When is Prolo Quota Go more acceptable than a generic communication book? And I make a lot of arguments against and for those devices as and when. Again, that's a whole other podcast that I could talk about AAC and the differences in the evidence base as for what. But as a speech and language therapist, I would always say, first, as I said at the beginning, don't panic. And I would say just give it a go. If the child is showing awareness, they're at a point, or try with the device. And that's part of communicating, is trying out different approaches. It might be Prolo Quota Go, they might be better off with the Now Next board at the beginning, about building it up. But I think there is a whole kind of dynamic assessment and approach that needs to be taken with every child, and every child is unique as to what will work best with them and why. But I think, yeah, having that ability to tap and press is very important, to be able to spontaneously, independently request and communicate, and also the understanding between objects and pitch level.
Thank you for that. In my experience with my own son, David, when he was given a device, he was actually, Sarah, only 7 when we realized we could give him a device. I wish we'd given it to him much sooner, because my older son, David, really struggled with a severe apraxia that colored his life, to be honest. And I wish we'd given it to him much earlier, because when we did give him the device, his challenging behaviors reduced. He didn't need to kick and scream and hit his head to try and communicate. He actually had an appropriate means, to push a button that had voice output to tell us what he needed. Also, David could never do sign language, because sign language, first of all, my son David would struggle to imitate. A lot of children on the spectrum struggle to imitate. Now you're asking them to imitate very fine motor. My son David could never do that. And that's why the device was so important for him. And I've seen it work for so many children, where it gives them a voice and it gives them an opportunity to continue their language development while you're working on their motor planning.
Absolutely. No, I 1,000 times agreeing with you. I say it so often, in it in various meetings that I attend, that this is the child's voice. This is the child's way of communicating, and it's not just an add-on. It's an absolute requirement of their daily living, and able to be function in their day. So yes, I am a very big advocate for AAC devices and giving it a go as early as possible. And I do believe with the high tech ones as well, as you said, the voice output is so important. That they're having that auditory feedback, which I think is another really important part of the development.
My son David actually uses Touch Chat, but I have seen a lot of the kids on our program use the Prolo Quote to go. A lot of kids actually do really well with that program. Leave us with a message of inspiration.
We are here as professionals to support parents and to ensure that every child reaches their communication potential. And never forget that in your daily lives, in the work that you're doing, that is our role as speech and language therapists.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your expertise. Thank you for being pro ABA. It's been delightful to speak to you, and I'm very excited for the parents and the therapists in South Africa to hear about your viewpoint on ABA and to hear you explain all the different diagnoses that we spoke about today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.